If not, let me know. So yes, I'm Becky Furuta, and I race for Team Novo Nordisk. I don't know how many of you have heard of the team, but we are a global all-diabetes sports organization. We're comprised of a professional men's cycling team, and those guys race some of the biggest events in the world. They race, they just got done in Argentina, they're in the Netherlands right now. They will later this year do the Ambient Tour of California, they'll do the USA Pro Challenge, so they're sort of all over the place. And then we have a women's team, and we race here in the United States. We race some of the biggest races domestically. We race most of what's on the National Criterium calendar and the National Racing calendar. Those are the two big ones here. Then we also have triathletes, and we have runners on our team, but all of us share in common a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. I started riding my bike when I was probably about Ellie's age, probably not much older than that. And like most kids, I think in the US, I didn't really have the sense that cycling was a sport, that there was any competitive aspect to it. Like most kids, I was just kind of riding up and down the street. And when I was about 14 or 15, my parents went through this really difficult phase. We went from being very middle income and having kind of a reasonable standard of living to my parents losing everything in about the span of 90 days. They lost their house, they lost their life savings, everything. And my dad took us out of school and moved us to this small mountain town on the western slope of Colorado. And during that time, we were essentially homeless. There was a period where we were living in motels, and there were 6 of us crammed in this one small room, myself and my 3 siblings, my mom and my dad. And we lived like that for a long time, and it was really, really hard. And eventually my dad saved up enough money to get this little kind of ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of this mountain town. And I mean, I remember driving up to that the first time and thinking, really? We're living here? I mean, there was a hole in the ceiling above my bed. And the first time it snowed, I woke up with snow on my arms and my face. And we had no heat. It was heated by this little wood-burning stove. There were periods where we had no electricity. We had no phone for probably about 2 years. This was before every kid had a cell phone. And so it was then that I really started riding my bike. There was this big stretch of time where I wasn't in school, and I didn't know anybody. We didn't have any friends. And if I didn't get on my bike, I was stuck in this tiny motel room or this really not so nice cabin, and no one wanted to fed my dad because he worked so hard to procure it for us. My only way out was to get on my bike and go ride. And so I'd get out first thing in the morning and I'd hop on my mountain bike and I'd ride up this dirt track to what they call Orchard Mesa, which was this mesa outside of town where they grew stone fruit. They grew lemons and plums and cherries to make wine. And I would ride my bike and steal fruit. And that's how I probably spent 6 months when I was between the ages of 14 and 15. And I loved being on my bike. My bike, during that time just took me away from this physical place that was really hard, but it also kind of calmed the turbulence that I had going on. And so when I went to college, I never got a driver's license. I just rode my bike. So I left home with 2 mountain bikes and I went to school. And when I was a student at CU, I ran into a guy who was on the CU bike team. And he said, you might really like cycling competitively. You should try road biking specifically. And I couldn't afford a road bike. There was no way. Road bikes are extremely expensive, especially relative to the mountain bikes I had. So I would borrow bikes, and I started racing on borrowed bikes, just whatever bike I could get my hands on that day. I would go out and train on the roads on a mountain bike, and then on the weekends I would race on someone else's road bike. And I fell in love with the sport and decided that was really what I wanted to do. And I worked 2 jobs so I could buy a road bike. And I started cycling competitively for the University of Colorado in 2002. And I raced with them for a few seasons. And then I graduated with a master's in public health in 2005. And I started racing for Title IX women's racing. I was with them for a few seasons. And then I started my own business, and I got married, and I had a couple kids. And competing kind of took a back seat to just being out on the bike. I always knew I'd come back to competition, but I was really waiting for that right time. And 2 little kids at home is definitely not the right time. So I'd go out and I'd train and, just kind of keep riding so I could stay active and stay fit. But I knew that the competition was going to wait for a while. And one day, I've been feeling tired and I've been feeling sluggish, and I just wasn't quite right for a while. But we kind of chalked it up to stress. There was actually a day I remember calling my husband from my office and saying, I'm too tired to drive home, I'm not safe to drive. It would be like me driving drunk, I was so tired. And he had to come pick me up from my office. But we kind of chalked it up to new parent syndrome. Anyone with kids, probably remembers the kind of foggy tired that you have then. And yeah, there was this one day where I decided to go out on a training ride. It was a bunch of girls that I'd ridden with 100 times. And it was a really slow social pace. It was a pace that, shouldn't have been a problem for me. And I got on the bike and I was dropped. Just done. Trying to catch up with them the entire time. We went a very short distance and I went through 3 or 4 bottles of water. We actually stopped so I could refill my bottles of water. And I got home, I walked through the front door of my house and I looked at my husband, he's stretched out on the sofa. And I said, I'm pretty sure I have diabetes. And my husband just laughed. It was laughing. There's no way. But I had a family history of disease. My grandmother had an adult onset of type 1. My mother and my aunt both had type 2 diabetes. And so I had a sense of how it presented. And I knew, especially having a master's degree in public health and having sort of studied disease trends, I knew I was presenting with the symptoms. And so I ignored my husband and I called my doctor and said, I think I have diabetes. She said, well, come on in, and everyone was assuming, that I probably didn't. She said, come on in, and we'll do a fasting blood test and then we'll do a 2-hour glucose challenge if you want. I said, okay. So I show up in her office and she, does the blood draw and she's like, we'll do a quick finger stick just so we have a sense right now. And she did that finger stick and everyone in the room stopped. And I looked at my husband and I was like, this is not good. I saw people's reaction. And she said, you know what, I'll be right back. She left, she came back and she said, we've called the emergency room to let you know, to let them know that you're on your way. Your blood sugar's a little elevated. And I had no idea what normal blood sugar values would be, but I asked anyway, what's a little elevated? She said, well, it's almost 500. And that sounded bad to me, knowing absolutely nothing about normal values. That sounded high. And so, sure enough, I showed up at the ER, and they said, well, yeah, that's pretty high. They confirmed the diagnosis, and we kind of went from there. And I remember my husband saying, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And I said to him, well, yeah, it's going to be okay. I was actually not at all concerned when I was in the emergency room. In some ways, it was actually kind of a relief to me because I knew what diabetes was. I had kind of this background with it. My grandmother was an incredibly well-managed type 1 diabetic, and she was very meticulous with her management and lived a very healthy, active life at a time when the technology was not nearly as good as what I had available to me in that moment. So I wasn't really panicked until it came time to discharge me. And I remember the doctor coming in and handing me the stack of prescriptions, and then this discharge sheet. He's like, okay, so here's your discharge orders. And it's this 8x11 sheet that had maybe a half a page of typewritten directions. And it was like everything you need to know about diabetes discharge paper. And I panicked. I looked at my husband and I was like, there's no way. There's no way. I knew I did not know that. And I went home and I just felt really overwhelmed. And so I went upstairs and I put on my cycling kit and I came back down and I'm going to go for a ride. And my husband just flipped. He was like, you are not serious. You have just been in the hospital. This is not a good idea. But I knew if I waited that I would never get back on that bike. I knew I would start thinking about it and I would get scared and I would not do it. And so I went out and I wound up doing about 80 solo miles. But I stopped probably, I would say every 10 to 15 minutes for the first 20 miles to check my blood sugar because I was so afraid of what might happen. And at the end of that ride, it was both frustrating and kind of empowering to me. There's the sense that, okay, this can be done, but there's also a sense that I needed some direction. So I obviously had an appointment scheduled with an endocrinologist, and I went into the doctor and said, help me do this. Help me figure out how to race a bike with type 1 diabetes. And she said, oh, you can't race a bike with type 1 diabetes. You can ride a bike. If you want to go out and ride recreationally, you should do that. But you can't ever go back to racing. I mean, that will never be an option. And the one thing about my personality is that I don't hear a lot of no's in my life. I hear a lot of this might be harder, but I don't really hear a lot of no's. And so I told her, I was like, well, I think I'm going to get a second opinion. And that was the last time I saw her. And then I went home and I went online and I started Googling bike racing with diabetes. And the first thing that popped up was the team that I'm now on. And I started reading the stories of these other riders, professional men who had type 1 diabetes. And they were able to race at this really high level and were racing very successfully with type 1. And so I found a doctor in Boulder who really specialized in sports and diabetes management. And she and I kind of made a plan and went forward with it. And I continued to train for the next maybe year and a half, 2 years. And then 3 years ago, I sent a resume kind of on a whim to the team that is now T1DOC. And I got a phone call back about 2 days later saying, how would you like to go to training camp in Tucson, Arizona? And I said, okay. And then I went home and told my husband that I was about to go to training camp in Tucson, Arizona, and then I was back to bike racing. And it was the most amazing experience. I was in a room for the first time filled with other athletes, all of whom had the same stories and the same histories and this sort of shared experience of living with the disease. And it was a really amazing experience to be with them, and still is. Every time I get on a plane with my bike to go fly to a race, I still have that little bit of like, this is an amazing thing to be doing. And this is a pretty incredible opportunity. My first year at the team was terrible. Honestly, I went to my first race in Dallas, Texas.
How do you know that's my name?
Just annihilated the race. I raced 2 days and barely finished the second race. It was terrible. And I was really questioning whether or not I was going to be able to get back in race shape. But the team did a great job of providing me with tools and resources, kind of connecting me with people and getting me the training that I needed to really be competitive again. So I showed up last season, and I had probably my best season since I was in college. I actually took second in the Pro-Am race for the US Paper Challenge. And this season, I started racing 3 weeks ago. My first stage race was not very good. I had kind of a field finish, like middle of the pack. And then I raced 2 weeks ago and took second. And then last weekend, I did the climb up Lookout Mountain. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Lookout Mountain in Wilmington. And I'm not a climber, and you can tell I'm not really built to climb, but I decided to just go ahead and do it. I'm preparing for a big climbing race next month, and so I figured it'd be good training, and I went out and did that and took third. So it's been a good start to the season so far. And since we have a small group of people with questions, I'm happy to answer.
Is this your sponsors? Do they provide bikes, equipment, everything, so you can upgrade bikes to state of the art?
Our sponsor is amazingly generous. You have to understand kind of the culture in cycling in the U.S. right now is really pared down. In fact, a lot of my very good male friends who ride for other pro teams found themselves in the position of being without teams this year because it's just scaled down. Our sponsor is amazingly generous. We get fabulous bikes this year. Our bike sponsor is Furuta, and they're absolutely beautiful machines. And then they provide us obviously with all of the gear that we would need to race. They pay our race expenses. They are just amazingly supportive. And in women's cycling specifically, you really don't find that. You don't find anything even close to the level of support that we provide.
Are they corporate sponsors?
So our title sponsor is Novo Nordisk, which is a pharmaceutical company. They make diabetes medications, and then they have on some other, their primary focus is really diabetes. And then we have some other sponsors. You know, we have a bike sponsor, obviously. We have a lot of in-kind sponsors. We have nutrition sponsors. None of us, you know, are employed by the pharmaceutical company. They are just the title sponsor. But I have to say, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of people in the company, and I've gone to their headquarters in New Jersey. They are a very young, healthy, active kind of company, and they were elated to be sponsoring the Slayers team. Yeah.
How do they leverage this team? How many people are on the two men's team?
So the men, I think right now we have about 20 professional men. The women's team is very small. Obviously, you know, it's kind of a niche to find women who race with type 1 diabetes. So there's 8 of us, I think, right now.
How do they leverage that team? I can see the symbiotic relationship with having what your products, which is the premier delivery company of these drugs, and having a diabetic team. Do you go to functions?
All of our athletes do outreach, yeah. All of our athletes do outreach. I mean, a big part of our mission, obviously, is to go out and you know, meet people with diabetes and impacted by diabetes. And speak with them, and especially with young people. You know, it is frustrating, I think, for a young person to be different than their peers, and I think that can create. There's a lot of self-consciousness into companies. To have a bunch of people, you know, out there, these really cool guys who ride these really slick bikes and they do it really fast. You know, talking about living with diabetes openly and honestly is huge. And so. You know, I've done everything from going to junior rap events. We do a lot of junior rap rides. We do events with the American Diabetes Association. Do private events. We love going to kids' camps. Camp is my favorite thing, hands down. You guys are talking about raising money for camp. You know, there is nothing better than diabetes camp for kids. I mean, I show up at those camps, and for so many of those kids, it is the only time in their life when they are going to be like everyone else. And to watch kids really mastering those skills, you know, learning to take care of their diabetes and to have that kind of peer support. We love it. We love it when we all get together, you know, all 100 athletes. It's the same thing for these young people.
I assume that when you show up at camp or any of these functions, you're fully dressed out in your bike gear. Sometimes. I spend a lot of time in Lycra.
Well, I know, but the idea of showing up as a team with all of the paraphernalia is very colorful, bright, you know, it really shows that you are like athletes. I would think that would be a big plus, especially for those kinds of functions where you're actually a goodwill ambassador for Nova, but also the fact that you can do this. I got to tell you that the story is fascinating. The part that disturbs me the most is that you had an endo, an original endo. This is only a few years ago.
About 8, yeah.
8 years ago, you had an endo that really you couldn't do this. And there's nothing, no part of your story that bothers me more than that.
And that's really
bothers me because there's a lot of athletes, very elite athletes, football players and baseball players, and a lot of people who become swimmers that are just absolutely phenomenal athletes. Okay, you're going to deal with this disease. Which is straight by the endo, a professional person to say that bothers me.
And it's true. I mean, one of the messages that we deliver sort of universally, whether you're diabetic or not, is that exercise is hands down the best and least prescribed medication that there is. The closest that I come to being cured from my diabetes is riding a bike, right? I mean, that's the closest that I ever get to living like everyone else. And so, yeah, I mean, we're obviously huge advocates of getting kids active and adults too. But I think a lot of endocrinologists get scared because I'm not sure that they all have a sense of how to manage it and what needs to happen. I mean, and I think that was her position, which is surprising too, given that it was Boulder, Colorado, right? Where there's a tremendous population of active people with diabetes. But one of the interesting things that we have done with the team is we have a bunch of team doctors. We obviously have a lot of healthcare professionals who collect data. there's a big push to do data collection because you're right, athletes with type 1 diabetes are not unusual at all. What we want to do is take that information and those best practices and that data and filter it down in usable form. So essentially all of our professional men are sort of, laboratory experiments as to how to be extremely active in type 1 diabetes.
How many from the team are here in Colorado?
So there are 3 of us who live here full time. There's myself and 2 people on our mountain bike team. There's a girl, Carrie White, who lives up in Vail, and then we have a guy, Dan Kunkelman, who lives up in Fort Collins, and they're both on the elite mountain bike and cyclocross team. We have some athletes who are in Colorado training right now. Joe Eldridge, who is one of the founders of the team, is in Boulder right now. And then we have a couple of younger guys who are here training, just sporadically. But there are 3 of us who live.
Demonstration projects here in the city that if we were to try to get the word out to the people in the community or doing that?
We race. I certainly race a good amount in Colorado. Certainly for the USA Challenge. We'll have our pro men here. I will be doing the women's elite races. I would guess that we'll have 2 other girls doing the women's elite races. So yeah, there are certainly those opportunities. And Carrie and Dan and myself are always happy to come to anything. We do a lot of kids clinics, which are super fun.
What's the time? Is there a season?
There used to be a season.
How much time do you spend personally in training and racing and traveling?
So my season once upon a time was March, April through August, September. Now, my season started in February and it will end in October. And then I'll go to training camp in November, December. So it's a pretty long season. During the peak season, right now I race almost every week. So it's kind of a cycle of racing and then, rest and recovery and racing again. But a typical training week for me on the low end is 14 hours, on the high end is 20. It's probably an average of 16 to 18 a week. And I work full time. I do have a full-time job and I have 2 kids, so life at our house is a circus. It's busy. And I travel with my kids. I try to structure my travel so I leave on Thursday or Friday and then I'm home. If I can fly out same day, I'll race, change clothes, pack up my bike, and get on the plane. So I'm home Sunday night. Worst case scenario is Monday morning.
Becky, how do you monitor yourself when you're racing?
So the team actually this is the good thing. They don't mandate that we use any specific protocol. We're free to manage our diabetes in whatever way we've decided with our doctors. I personally choose to do multiple daily injections. They don't have a pump. And then my preference is actually finger sticks. I am not, I sound like some kind of, I know these young people just think I'm like some kind of technophobe or something, but I prefer to just do finger sticks. I do have a continuous glucose monitor. I do wear it, especially during longer races or if I'm stage racing where I'm racing, 3-4 days in a row. It's nice, it's handy for me to have that continuous glucose monitor.
I often wonder, you see those support trucks during the race, going along on bicycles, giving them food, giving them liquid, putting a cast on their arm. I just wondered if you just stick your finger in there and
you
get a little blood.
And that's why you have to have this.
Say, hey, you're 65. You're 65 and falling.
No, because you can't really check on the bike, and obviously the symptoms of exercise kind of mask the symptoms of what could be a low blood sugar. So, most of us who are, we've done this so much. I spend 20 hours a week on my bike, but it's as predictable as if it was sitting in my office generally. But yeah, there are times when that continuous glucose monitor gets handy. Our goal actually is to fuel as much like a non-diabetic athlete as we can. I never want to find myself in a position where I'm fueling my exercise or eating around my diabetes. I want to be able to take in food when I feel like I need to eat, when I'm hungry, or you do get hungry, or when I feel like I need the added energy. And I don't want to be in a position where my blood sugar is so high that I can't eat, And I also don't want to be in a position, obviously, of trying to eat myself out of the budget. Because if you're in the middle of a race, and yeah, you're 65 and falling, to catch up is going to be very, very difficult. Like, you're expending energy and taking in food. You're just never gonna catch that.
Because you know, a pump's worthless when you're racing.
Yeah, well,
Not
and we
only
do
it
have
feeds
some athletes-
insulin, you don't need it.
We do have some athletes on a pump. I mean, we have some athletes who choose insulin pumps. Probably, well, certainly the majority of our athletes choose injections.
You know, another thing that I mentioned my son. The two of you sound so similar in many ways because you said the most effective, the most underutilized method of control and management of this disease is exercise, and he's in the same camp. He was diagnosed, and shortly after that, he started playing football in high school, and his numbers as a newly diagnosed diabetic were enormously improved when he was out there just busting his butt playing football. And as a result, Jason's a gym rat. He spends a lot of time in the gym every day.
Yeah.
And he can manage his disease very effectively. And it's just amazing how many T1s don't use that tool.
Oh, I mean,
Very effective tool.
I don't think you have a diabetes management plan if you don't have some kind of exercise built into it. You are not managing your diabetes as effectively as you could be if you have a plan that does not incorporate exercise. I mean, you guys probably know that. She's very active. Ellie, I have to tell you, Ellie, we've never met, but we sent her a jersey. The team heard about her, and it was her diabetes anniversary. And so we sent her a jersey. So she's got the exact jersey. It's not even a replica. She's got the official Team T1DOC jersey.
She's a soccer player, an Irish dancer.
And we have this amazing picture of her with this huge grin. It's like my favorite picture ever. I get pictures of kids in jerseys all the time, and Ellie is hands down the one that we all just fell in love with. We love her. So. Everyone's going to be really jealous when I tell them that you were here and they didn't get to meet you.
Well, she's available. She's available for public display.
I Yeah, we should have some people at ADA camp. And again, that's really probably one of my passions in the diabetes advocacy. Those camps are just so important to me. You can't even imagine the importance of what happens there. Yeah. Has she gone before?
No, so this is her first year she's going. We did riding on
With Sean? Yes.
not very enough, but she's not quite old enough.
And he's great. Yeah.
You have a little gap with all the different professional athletes at that time, or use network to communicate?
You know, it's kind of interesting. I know Sean pretty informally, and so, he and I chat occasionally. But yeah, I mean, there's that sense of like commonality, and you meet people and you know people. Charlie Kimball, who's the IndyCar driver, I know Charlie pretty well, and he and I actually did a kids camp in Washington a couple years ago together. So yeah, it is kind of a neat little network of other, and there are so many really just wonderful, inspiring. I mean, I think Charlie's a good example. He is just the nicest guy you'll ever meet. Just really warm and authentic, and there are a lot of good role models. I mean, I think it's hard to find sometimes good role models in sports, but I think guys like Sean and Charlie and the ones that I know are just amazing people. Yeah.
The bike sponsor coming out, if we did a project to try to get lower end bikes to kids that maybe are economic groups that can't afford to have a bike, is there any potential that the sponsor might work on a project like that?
Drop me an email and I can always forward that to Team T1DOC. We have done a couple of bikes. Actually, in the 3 years I've been on the team, I've done 2 bike giveaways. One was a huge giveaway for 100 kids in inner city Dallas. And then last year at Team T1DOC, we were actually at the company headquarters and did an event for the Boys and Girls Club of Trenton, New Jersey, with some kids who actually they had to compete to get the bikes because there were so many kids who wanted them. So they asked them to write essays about what they wanted to do when they grew up and why they felt like they should have a bike. And those essays were both amazing, but really, really heartbreaking. I mean, heartbreaking stories. And those kids just blew me away. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are you at the Tour de Cure? So my husband is on the Tour de Cure committee. Yeah. Yeah, I signed him up. I used to do the committee, I just don't have time now because I travel so much. So he will definitely be working Tour de Cure, which means I will probably be either riding the family route with my 2 kids, or I will be like just kind of milling around. It's sort of bad timing because the Tour de Cure this year is August 16th, and then the USA Pro Challenge elite races for the women are the 17th and 18th. So they're just up in Gunnison, but we're gonna have to like haul out of here on the 16th as soon as he's done with his commitments and head up there. But yeah, I mean, historically I've done like the VIP dinner and things like that. I did a VIP event with, I don't know if you guys know the Olympic mountain biker Georgia Gould, who lives up in Fort Collins. And she and I did the VIP event for Tour de Cure last year, and she has absolutely no connection to diabetes. I asked her, I'm like, what's your connection to diabetes? And she's like, they called and asked me if I wanted to do this, and I thought it was a good cause. And I thought that was fantastic. I mean, this is a woman who's highly in demand. She's one of the top in her sport in the world. And spent a day just because she thought it was a good cause.
Well, thank you very, very much.